Welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
Ad Astra, the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast.
So today we're going to be talking about, in our latest from Washington section, Mike Rogers apparently beefing with the Air Force over space, and Blue Origin building a rocket factory in Bama. In our space news highlight of the week, we're going to be talking about the recent controversial video from Anonymous that seems to have made its way across the internet. In international news, we'll talk about Arianespace and ESA's effort to build a reusable rocket engine. And latest in tech, we're going to be talking about what everyone's talking about this week, which is the crazy SpaceX launches from this past weekend. They launched 2 rockets in the same weekend because, you know, they're SpaceX. Also, we're going to touch a little bit more news about the Eclipse that's coming up in August. And finally, and coming soon to space, we'll be talking a little bit about a future panel that I'm going to be on. So,
awesome.
Chat, what's going on this week?
So, we have space drama here in Washington. So as you mentioned earlier in our brief recap of the episode, Mike Rogers, a congressman from Alabama, is beefing with the Air Force, specifically beefing with the new Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, over this thing called the Space Corps. And it's exactly what you think it is. Well, maybe not. So the Space Corps is supposed to be an amalgamation of all of the different space units within the U.S. military. So this came about as, this idea has been around for a while, but this current bit of drama came out when there was a subcommittee markup of the fiscal year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. So the NDAA is, as with other authorization acts, just authorizes, hence the name, funds for the Department of Defense to use. It does not actually appropriate that money. It does not give that money to DoD, as with all authorizations. It just says this government agency is allowed to use this money for X, and this is how much money we recommend. So the appropriations tend to vary from that number. It's usually a lower number in what they appropriate. Because, you know, overages and delays can increase that cost. Emergency appropriations can get you up to that top line level that the authorizations create. Anyway, so this subcommittee markup of NDAA, Mike Rogers, who sits on the committee, is calling for an amendment to the NDAA that creates a Space Corps. So what a Space Corps would be is almost the same way that the Marine Corps is under the Navy, where it has almost this semi-branch-like status without being its own branch of the military. It has a seat on at the table.
It's even commonly, you know, a lot of people think that the Marines are their own sort of branch of the military.
When there's only 3.
Right.
Well, I think there's technically 5. I think technically the Coast Guard's its own branch. But anyway, we can get into the minutia there. But so what this would create basically was it would take all of the different units that deal with space. So the 18th Air Squadron, it's like the 1st Space Squadron or something like that. I don't know. There's a bunch of different units across Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force that deal with space. And that includes satellite communications, that includes space debris mitigation, that includes orbital trajectories. They cover the gambit. And what the Space Corps would do is combine them all into one corps underneath the Air Force, and would also have a seat at the table with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this would be a huge increase in the profile for military space. Previously, I mean, things have been sort of disjointed. We have things like JICSPOC and JSPOC, which is JICSPOC's being renamed to the National Defense Center or National Strategic Defense Center, whatever it's called. And there was sort of the space sort of is under U.S. Strategic Command as well. So there's all these different ways that space is organized within defense space. But what this would do is not get rid of that. It's not like it's getting rid of Strategic Command. It's not getting rid of these other working groups that are set up, but it would house everything within the Air Force. So where the beef comes in is that, as Mike Rogers is on his soapbox talking about why we need a Space Corps. In response to that, Heather Wilson, Secretary of the Air Force, and Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein came out and said, you know what? We don't really need a Space Corps right now. And according to Mike Rogers, he took that as an insult and has since been, I guess, a little outraged.
What was their reasoning?
So their reasoning is that it's not. I include an article in the show notes that folks can read, but the gist of it is that they don't think that space poses enough of it's not a medium of warfare quite yet. It's not strategically in the same place as air, land, or sea.
Interesting. I mean, I'm looking at this report by Breaking Defense, and really it kind of sounds like their focus is a bit more on efficiency. They think that it'll be more efficient to not have a Space Corps than to have one. I mean, there's this quote by either Wilson or Goldfein, basically, it was Wilson, stating Wilson. that the Pentagon is complicated enough, and that the proposal would only add complexity. He was saying, I don't need another chief of staff and another 6 deputy chiefs of staff.
Exactly. I mean, that's their main concern, is that it's not the time for this. We don't have the infrastructure to develop a Space Corps out to what it should be. We need to take this in baby steps, which seems to be the idea from the community, from people I've talked to, both within defense space and just in the space community in general, that Space Corps is eventually going to be necessary just because of the growing nature of our dependence on that domain, for communications, for remote sensing, all that stuff, and potentially with warfighting. But right now is not the time.
If not now, then when, though? I mean, to what point where do our capabilities need to be in order for us to say, all right, now's the time for a Space Corps? I think really what it shows is they're seeing a bit of a threat from other places that are getting involved in space. And perhaps now is the time, just like they did with cyberspace and U.S. Cybercom and sort of separating that out. Granted, it's not to the level that they're talking about here, but they attempt to push all of cyber out to an individual organization, even though it's still amongst many organizations. It seems reasonable if they see some sort of threat coming from the space domain, or even the potential for a threat, that they would want to do this. The question is, how do they see that as being different now, as opposed to the back in the Apollo era? And
so I think my understanding of it is that it's very complicated right now, that the space domain is not as mature as land, sea, air, or even cyber.
Which is why they want to build this.
They want to build it to mature that infrastructure.
Right.
But I don't think that it's necessary right now, because what this is being based on, what this move, especially by Rogers, is being based on, is in the perceived threat, not in any actual threat. I mean, if Wilson came out and said, "Hey, there is a credible threat from the Chinese or from ISIS, from a non-state actor to interfere with the space domain," then I would say, yeah, we should have been doing this 5 years ago.
But that's the key, though. You would say we should have been doing this.
Do you wait until someone sends up a high altitude nuclear weapon and detonate it and takes out our entire telecommunications network when we say, oh, we should have been doing something 5 years ago? Right. Well,
and that's my
I agree.
And that's my point, right? Like we're seeing other places. China's now getting involved in space, and they're going, they're trying to get to the moon. We've talked about this a lot in previous episodes about how they're trying to get to the moon, and within 10 years, I believe it is. And we have other nations starting to get their feet wet in the space domain, and we always have our good frenemies, Russia, that are continuing to conduct space operations, albeit some of them are cooperatively with us, but they're starting to do so as well. So
I would just say that it's a little premature. Is the thing is like we're going straight from it being like a working group to it being its own core. Now, I agree that we have to get to that point.
Yeah, okay.
I would agree that we have to get there eventually. That at some point we should even just have a space force, that it should be its own branch of the military where you have, an entire wing of the, what would that be? The sectagon of people doing space stuff. But to take the perceived threat, there is, other than the 2007 Chinese ASAT test, there really hasn't been much in terms of viable threats in the space domain. There's been isolated incidents here and there, but nothing on the scale that would warrant such a response. And the international, the reverberations that this would create within the international community could be could be so great that us creating a space corps could put, that's certainly going to put Russia and China on the defensive. They're going to be like, like they're actually like serious about this and like war fighting in space. And then they militarize. And then that's where you get a situation that you have like during the days of Apollo with the Cold War. That's I think the predecessor.
Just call it something a little lighter, like the Department of Spaceland Security. When it's
well, what I would propose would be a paradigm of or not really a paradigm, but like a linear growth over time. That starting today, we develop, instead of creating a space corps in legislation, we call on the Secretary of the Air Force to develop a report that puts together, all the best minds in DoD and from academia on what they think the proper timeline should be. And then over the course of 5 years or 10 years or whatever that research entails, talking policy here, like whatever that research entails, if it's like, oh, within the next 2 years, there's going to be a credible threat from North Korea in space, then we pump up the gears and really kind of drive this thing home. But if it's saying, okay, right now space is not, there's no immediate threat in space, we can take our time, we can develop that international relationship with other defense agencies to say, hey, we're going to do this. We don't want you to be left out. We don't want you to feel like this is a move on our part to take the space domain in the name of the United States. But this is something we're going to do. So to make this as transparent as possible with the international community, so you don't have flashpoints in space, and then also to make this very inclusive of other parts of the U.S. government, would probably be better situation or a better strategy for creating a space corps and a space force. I would wholeheartedly agree that within the next 15 to 20 years, we should have a space corps, maybe even a space force. But there's no evidence, I don't think, that this needs to happen in the next year or the next 2 years.
Not at all.
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying this is like, it's just perceived politics on behalf of Mike Rogers, who time and time again comes out and says the Chinese are beating us. We have to beat the Chinese. The Russians are beating us.
I'm looking at some of these quotes here, and he used the word outraged and shocked by the response from the Air Force's leadership, which is almost, I mean, that's almost as bad as saying you're troubled, right? This day and age in politics. He said maybe we need a Space Corps secretary instead of leaving it to the Secretary of the Air Force. And he was just kind of dogging the Air Force and saying this is the same Air Force that got us into our situation where the Russians and the Chinese are near peers to us in space, which
just is not true at all.
That leap, but okay. And he's saying we will not allow the status quo to continue. I mean, I'm all for us increasing, our defensive capabilities and defensive capabilities, particularly in space, because it is going to be a new threat. But I don't think this is something that we need next year.
Next year, even before the next administration, I don't think we need. I think we need to start working towards it because, yes, I agree that the space domain is becoming increasingly important as our infrastructure develops in the 21st century. But I don't think it warrants this wolf crying over the Chinese are getting better at space, the Russians are getting better at space, they want to kill us. Like, it's that exact attitude that Mike Rogers is coming at this with that could cause potential problems down the road.
But I've got to be thinking that he doesn't think this is actually going to fly and that he's just at least getting the topic on the table. Hopefully that I'm thinking
knowing his history in defense space, this is something he's been trying to get started for a while. I mean, talk of Space Corps began, 30 years ago plus. But like,
maybe I'm giving him too much credit.
He's like the most recent person to be crying this. He would want to see this in the next 2 years. And it's also a power play for him because, he's certainly trying to move up within the committee. He's trying to move up in politics. And if he can take on the Secretary of the Air Force and win, that's a bunch of political points in his corner, especially if he wants to eventually be either in charge of the Space Force or in DOD in some capacity, whatever it is. Or if he wants to be in the White House, for all we know. This is one step closer for him. I just think it's far-fetched, and we need to not rush into things like this for the many risks that I have mentioned.
I agree. So anyway, moving on. Tell us what's going on with Jeff Bezos out in Alabama. What's he doing out in Bama?
Bama. The what's their call? The Crimson Tide State? I don't know. Something like that.
I don't. No.
But so Jeff Bezos announced. Well, actually, it was Governor Kay Ivey of Alabama that announced on last Monday, for people listening to this on Wednesday, that Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' private spaceflight company, will be building a facility in the Huntsville, Alabama area to manufacture the BE-4 rocket engine. So the BE-4 is designed to go on the New Glenn rocket. It's going to be the thing that takes this thing up and brings it back down, almost exactly like how the SpaceX Falcon 9 engines work. But this is for Blue Origin. So,
and I believe it's slightly more. I believe it has slightly more thrust in their engines. I know the BE-4 it's fueled by liquid oxygen and liquefied natural gas, and I want to say I'm looking it up on Google. It produces 550,000 pounds of thrust, which is, that's pretty intense. It's less than Falcon Heavy, larger than Falcon 9.
Yeah. So, Blue Origin is basically running the middle ground between the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy. So it's sort of a medium plus heavy light vehicle that's going to be able to do a lot of the things that Falcon 9 can do and more, but not be as expensive as the Falcon Heavy. So this new factory opening in Alabama is going to be in the Huntsville area. So anybody who knows, Huntsville is the home of Marshall Space Flight Center. It's the home of over 300 aerospace companies. There is a large history in the Huntsville area for space and aerospace and defense.
It's a major hub.
Yeah, and so this new factory is going to create approximately 342 new manufacturing jobs in the area, let alone all of the construction jobs. It's going to be a 200,000 square foot plant, and Blue Origin is investing about $200 million in that area to make this happen. Average salary is going to be $75K plus benefits, so I'm going to be moving down there. That's a lot in Alabama,
actually. Do you see that wouldn't necessarily fly with, actually, in most parts of the country?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, so Huntsville, like I said, is Rocket City. It has such a large and long history of being involved with the aerospace industry. It's a lot for Alabama, but I think that's pretty in line with that area. But again, that's 340 new manufacturing jobs with, of course, the option of expansion. If New Glenn takes off, pun intended, they might need to develop more BE-4 engines. So this is going to be great for the area of Alabama. The Alabama Department of Commerce estimated that over the next 20 years after this project's completed, around the 2020 timeframe, it could generate over $633 million in wages.
Nice.
And offer $43 million in tax benefits to the state. So this is great for the Alabama area and also great for the aerospace industry, because that just means that Blue Origin's ramping up for launches soon.
Right.
That's as far as we know, though. Like that's about as far as soon, within the next decade.
Right. I mean, and the thing is, like, strengthening each of the major space hubs is overall good for aerospace. I mean, these projects, a lot of them are getting funded because they're in these districts that are all over the country, and senators, people in the House, they love to fund these projects within their own district. So if there is a space program that's looking for a specific site to be performed at, I mean, it's a good way for money to get thrown into a particular district or county.
Yeah. And then you have that brain transfer too here. I mean, Huntsville is the place where the SLS is being built. I could very well see there being some notes being exchanged officially between NASA and Blue Origin and SpaceX probably too. They probably have a manufacturing facility down there too. But yeah, I think this is going to be good for the industry, and looking forward to what this might bring in the future with Blue Origin and the New Glenn rocket expected in 2020.
Props to you, Bezos.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to the space news highlight of the week.
So they found life.
I swear
NASA
to God.
found life. I watched this video from Anonymous. Oh, dude.
I watched this video
NASA
from Anonymous where they kind of said they found life, but didn't really. So let me tell the listeners what we're talking about. So the space news highlight of the week is kind of a space news anti-highlight, as in, no, NASA has not found alien life. In their latest video, Anonymous, the well-known hacktivist group, which is a term I despise, claimed that the head of NASA Science Mission Directorate, Professor Thomas Zurbuchen, the gentleman we talked about last week, who was featured on the webcast about the solar eclipse, he told the meeting, a meeting that he was in back in April, that, quote, "Our civilization is on the verge of discovering evidence of alien life in the cosmos," something I say to you every week. Taking into account all of the different activities and missions that are searching for alien life, we are on the verge of making one of the most profound, unprecedented discoveries in history, end quote. The hackers in Anonymous published a YouTube clip overnight, which claimed that he made an announcement that announcement at the meeting of the U.S. Science, Space, and Technology Committee back in April. It was a hearing. So in their video, though, Anonymous takes the second half of this sentence and kind of runs with it. In the video, a gentleman wearing a Guy Fawkes mask, as they usually do, states that NASA, mankind is about to discover extraterrestrial life. And what they said specifically in that video isn't necessarily, I don't think it was that bad, right? All he really talked about was, how mankind is about to discover extraterrestrial life. But my problem isn't with Anonymous here. It's kind of with the public reaction, because you have tons of people all over Twitter now going, oh, they discovered life. Like, it's a done deal. It's a wrap. And just not what it is at all.
I am shaking my head. It's gonna,
what's that?
My head's gonna come off. I'm shaking it.
Right. Like, so yeah, I mean, and this all comes from stuff that we talked about last week, with satellites like Kepler Space Telescope that's out there discovering thousands of exoplanets, or things like the recent discovery of hydrogen geysers on Enceladus, things like, the Jovian satellite Europa, which has a giant underwater ocean underneath. Each of these sort of discoveries that we've made over the last, let's say, roughly a decade, are seriously indicating that it's highly unlikely that we're alone out here, right? That even if our form of life isn't necessarily prevalent, some form of life almost has to be. There's so much diversity. There's so many different things happening at the complex chemical level in the universe, even some of which is in our own backyard, like Enceladus and Europa. There's a feeling that there has to be something out there, which I understand. Like I said, we get on and we talk about this every week. One of these exoplanet discoveries is going to pan out, or we potentially could, and this I think is a slightly less, or a lot less probability that we would discover some signal being sent, via radio. But something is going to come about, and we have a bunch of useful techniques. We're uncovering a lot of evidence. We're on the verge, but we haven't found anything yet.
I mean, I feels like this almost happens every year or every couple of years, that like everyone has this moment where they're like, oh, we discovered life, right? Like, it had to have happened by this point. But they downplay how monumental of a discovery that would be. I mean, this would be something that would upend our entire understanding of our place in the universe and how common life is, and especially depending on where we find it. I mean, I would almost say receiving a signal from, the TRAPPIST system, or receiving a signal from the Alpha Centauri system, probably wouldn't have the same, or would have less of a scientific impact than finding life on Mars or Europa. I mean, just because if we found, I would just say, because if we found life on Mars or Europa, that means life is far more common than if we say, oh, there's another Earth-like planet that has life, and yes, it's sentient, yes, it's intelligent, we received a signal. Yes, it would be monumental and change our entire concept of life in the universe. But if life was as common as literally any place that has these basic elements, that would change it completely, because it's like, yeah, there's, we could then expect every Earth-like planet has life on it.
I don't know. So for me, honestly, the second one would be much more shocking, because I think at this point, and obviously we're in a bubble, but I think at this point, the public has some understanding. For as little as most people think about space, they have some understanding that, we could possibly find microbes out there, right? Or that we could possibly find. But for another species to actually be communicating and for us to hear that those communications, like that, I think would have a greater shock, on our society.
Yes. I think that have a bigger cultural impact and societal impact. I mean, that would, if there was a being actually talking to us, or sentient beings sending us messages through the cosmos,
or we would just hear it. Their communication, just based on the way radio signals work.
Oh yeah, if we received any communication whatsoever, it doesn't matter if it was directed at us or whatnot.
Right.
But that would be the biggest discovery in the universe of all time. That would be huge,
because I look at every conference or space event that we go to, somebody without fail, it's almost obligatory now, asks about the Drake equation. Oh, we've been looking for so long, when we've only really been looking for 60 years. we've been looking for so long. How come we haven't found anything yet? I would be shocked if we found something after only 60 years of looking. Like that would be insane. Right? Like, because that tells you that in the span of the universe, right? Only 60, it took only 60 years, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, for two species to acknowledge each other, or one species to acknowledge another, right? That would be incredibly shocking. Finding microbes, I think, is extremely important. Is important from a societal standpoint, from a biological standpoint. I think it just kind of confirms societal suspicions. But from a biological standpoint, actually being able to see and touch and experiment with other biology, that would be amazing. All right, I don't want to downplay that at all. But the notion of actually being able to acknowledge technologically another species' presence, that's a whole that's a whole different ballpark that you're playing in.
I totally agree. I'm more looking at it less from that cultural perspective, which is, I guess that's weird for me because I'm always talking about culture in space. But yeah, I think it would, the microbes would have a much lower societal impact, just because there's probably a good chunk of the population, I would like to see polling numbers on this, that believe that we've already found life on Mars or Europa.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a significant percentage of people in the space community that believe we've already done that. But the thing is I think that yields so much more scientific results.
It's a stronger science result.
Yeah, because then it's it's only, it only takes 2 years to get everything ready to go to Mars. So let's do that, and we can experiment with life there and can do a lot more immediate science with that. Whereas there wouldn't be, I guess, as much scientific output from interacting with another species. I mean, there certainly would be a plethora of it. There would, it'd be the topic of every news article, every journal article for the next, umpteen decades. But the scientific benefit of finding microbes in our solar system, as opposed to communicating with another species, the scientific benefit's even higher, I think.
Right. And I'm channeling a previous chief scientist of JPL when I say this, but I mean, that literally changes biology forever. I mean, you go through and you look at the different fundamental sciences and how they've been affected by space. Okay, we studied physics here, but then we were able to gather universal principles when we studied physics out in the universe. Same thing with chemistry, same thing with geology, but there's only one science where we haven't really been able to study that science out elsewhere in the universe, and have only been dealing with the sample that's here, and that's biology. That's, I mean, just even understanding if we do decide to take those microbes with us, understanding what kind of biology they have. Do these things have DNA? Do they have a genetic code? What does that structure look like? Does it look like anything like ours? In our solar system, in our solar system, that might be likely, because we are all kind of constructed of the same stuff. But I mean, we've had quite some time here on Earth to develop our own form of biology. So to see if it's different from just planet to planet, without considering the fact that we're from the same solar system would be a very interesting scientific result. Because from that, you can draw sort of these properties that are universal throughout both of our different biologies.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, you know what? Either of them. I'll take either of them.
Yeah, I'll take both. I'll take both.
we were talking over the weekend, me and a couple friends, and we were like, what is the one thing you want to live to see? If you could live until this thing happens, realistically, if a couple of years after it, maybe, to see some of the ramifications. But people were like, oh, I want to see Led Zeppelin in concert, or I want to see
what?
or like I
like Led Zeppelin and all, but if you give me one option, like
well, sometimes it's important to people, but whatever. And I was like, I want to know that we're not alone. That's I really don't care how it happens, whether it's we get a signal from some star, 200 light years away, or if we, discover microbial life on Mars. I just want to see it happen in my lifetime. Life in our lifetime.
Life in our lifetime. All right.
So I guess moving on to international news, unless you have anything else to add about life.
I've got nothing else. I just wanted to say, just stop reading headlines, people.
Yeah, stop reading headlines and stop believing everything you see on YouTube.
Well, I mean, but if you just sat and watched the video, you see what they said, and it's not that they were saying NASA's keeping it a secret.
Yeah, 18,000 people are keeping a secret. That's easy. That and the moon landings, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we all know the moon landing was a giant hoax.
But so international news, ESA, the European Space Agency, is kickstarting the Prometheus project, which already sounds ominous, but it's not. It's actually them developing a reusable rocket engine. So it's going to be on the, I think on the Ariane 6. Yes. On the Ariane 6 rocket, which the first test fire demonstration for that is supposed to be in 2020. The European Space Agency is putting in $1 million or 1 million euros, which is about $1.1 million in U.S. currency, to develop Prometheus, which is going to be a liquid oxygen and methane fueled engine that will be reusable. Which is certainly going to cut the cost of the Ariane 6. Ariane 6.
Ariane.
You caught me. You caught me there.
That's a very important difference. That's interesting. I'm anxious to hear a little bit more about the design, which I don't see much, or I haven't seen much, when Googling this, but I'm guessing that's because they're just getting started. I'm sure there will be more to come in terms of the actual technology behind it. Props to ESA for trying to, use their tax dollars to do what our private companies are doing, which is interesting.
Let me correct something I had literally just said. It was not €1 million that they invested. They're investing 80 million euros, which is close to what would that be?
80 million euros,
$90 million, something like that.
Something like that. But I think what you were thinking was that the actual engine would cost about €1 million a copy.
Yeah, which is a tenth of what the predecessor to the Ariane 6, the Ariane 5. That's what that engine costs. Is about 10 million euros.
Right. Oh, props to them. So anyway, speaking of reusable engines and stages in this case.
Oh, did SpaceX do anything this weekend?
This is the one time I'm not exhausted talking about SpaceX because they're launching rockets like crazy now. They're like, oh, we're just going to launch 2 in a weekend. Who cares? So last Friday, SpaceX launched a Bulgarian satellite into orbit from Florida using one of its refurbished Falcon 9s. And then again on Sunday, they launched another one. This is Sunday 6:25 and Friday 6:23 for our listeners who are listening to this weeks in the future. Because for some reason people love to catch up on this podcast by starting on episode 1. I'm not sure why that is. But
So if this is like 3 months in the future and you're listening to this, thank you. First off, but then also you should listen to the most recent episode. The January 22nd, 2019 episode is great.
I hope.
we have to specifically make that episode great
between now and then. Anyway, back to the Space Policy Podcast. This one was a newer version of the same rocket, the one they launched on Sunday. The Friday one was refurbished. The Sunday one was just a newer version. And that one sent up 10 smaller satellites for the telco company Iridium. And it launched from California. But just a few facts here before we really start diving into it. One, this is their 9th launch in 2017. It's June. It's their 9th launch in 2017. And it now means that SpaceX has now had 13 landing successes for each of their missions where they sought to recover the booster. And they have another 6 launches on the books for Iridium, whose existing network of more than 60 spacecraft is now well past its design life. So they're really doing this. I mean, they're launching rockets like it's normal. No one's surprised anymore. No one's surprised that they're able to reuse one of their rockets. This is kind of where we want to be, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, This is still just a step, but one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. As who was that? That was Neil Armstrong said that. Some guy. He was on
Neil
the moon.
guy.
But this is absolutely where we want to be heading. Is towards this reusability being a constant theme throughout the space economy. I mean, it's so much so that to sort of jump back to latest from Washington for a second. During that hearing about NDAA. Representative Trent Franks from Arizona offered up an amendment that within the authorization that they were going to add in a little section all about the certification of reusable launch vehicles for national security space missions. Wow. So that would mean putting that in would mean that the Air Force, most likely Air Force under DoD, would have to put together a set of criteria, a certification for companies like SpaceX who want to use reflown rockets on national security payloads. Because, I mean, right now, we haven't really reused a lot of rockets. This is the 3rd time that we've done it. Well, 2nd and 3rd time. This would be enormously cost effective for the U.S. government to get involved in this, and especially with national security, because those payloads can be very expensive because they want every mission assurance they can afford. But I mean, to cut costs from 3-digit $1 million launches with ULA down to $60 million or $70 million with SpaceX would be an incredible cost savings for the U.S. government, and could also then further push companies like ULA, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin's joint venture to develop reusable launch capabilities. Because right now they're, although the most effective in the game, I mean, they've never lost a rocket. They've only ever had one Delta IV that was off course a little bit in the entire history of the organization. But it also costs like $140 million to fly on one of those things. Right. So pushing them to become more reusable, or at the very least more cost effective, can really drive down costs and open up more markets in the space economy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One additional mention before we end this story. The returning booster this time around had new titanium grid fins to help steer the vehicle back to its waiting drone ship. So apparently SpaceX has been working on those precision landings a bit more, and has been working to place these new titanium grid fins, which are more robust than the previous aluminum type onto their rocket. Before it was sort of a requirement to have to repair or replace that aluminum every time, and now they can just use these new titanium grid fins and just have it go up and down many more times without need for significant repair. So,
yeah. So awesome! Congratulations, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and all the Muskrats out there. You're really changing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, one last story in latest in tech. 2 million free Eclipse glasses are coming to U.S. libraries. This is really cool. This is a big, to me, this is a big STEM push, right? Libraries are taking up this offer, apparently. Over 2 million pairs of free Eclipse glasses will be distributed by libraries and library organizations across the U.S. for the August 21st, 2017 total solar eclipse. This is the what they're calling the Great American Eclipse that hasn't happened in 99 years. And we chatted a bit about this last week, but the eclipse is going to, not the eclipse, wow. The Crips all over the U.S., run. The eclipse will pass over the U.S. Along a stretch of land from Oregon to all the way down to South Carolina. And viewers that are in the path of totality, which spans about 70 miles wide. That means that there's a 70-mile wide sort of path that you'll be able to see total darkness in the middle of the day. They'll be able to see the moon directly, or at least they'll be able to see the moon directly pass in front of the sun and just briefly turn daylight into effectively twilight. So not total darkness. But yeah, it's really cool. I think it's 4,800 library organizations are giving away these free glasses as a part of an outreach project funded by a grant from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to SSI, a nonprofit corporation focused on scientific research, education, and outreach. So this is a great project. It's also supported by Google and NSF and NASA. Along with SSI. So really cool STEM program.
Yeah, no, I mean, I am extremely excited for the Eclipse. And just seeing that they're going to be able to have 2 million people. I mean, 2 million people get free glasses, let alone all the people who then go, my kid got one at school. I have to buy 3 more for everyone else in the family. This is going to be an amazing opportunity. Again, like you said, this is the first time in nearly a century that this has happened, that an eclipse like this has happened. And it could very well be an opportunity to bridge a lot of knowledge gaps and a lot of gaps between communities too, as people come together to watch something that happens so rarely, let alone in your lifetime.
Yeah, one thing that's going to be interesting about it is these are some of those brief moments that just kind of remind people that, oh yeah, space is a thing. Like, because I think we're past the stage where we think that, that this, that a total solar eclipse is, the devil coming in front of the sun. Like, people at least acknowledge that, like, oh, this is the event that's happening. It's just kind of a reminder for everyone of their place in the solar system, let alone the universe. Yeah. And it should be fun.
It'll be a great way to know your place in space. And for those of you who are in the DC area, you can actually get some free solar eclipse glasses if you contact me on Facebook or Twitter or email or text message or carrier pigeon, because the Planetary Society is also getting ready to give out a bunch of these solar eclipse glasses. So be sure to tag me before, I think our deadline is July 11th. So just any time before that, so I can get you a free Planetary Society branded solar eclipse sunglasses, I guess they'd still be called.
Cool. All right. So other than that, coming soon to space, just a couple of announcements. I'll be on a panel this Wednesday, the day this episode comes out, at 8 o'clock at the Arlington Tech Exchange out in Arlington, Virginia. I got invited to a panel on the STEM plus art forum. So just understanding the way that art fits in with STEM and why art has an impact in actual STEM fields. I'll be talking about that with a panel of women. Actually, it's the Women in Technology Young Professionals group. I randomly got invited to this. The Women in Technology Young Professionals group is they're a group that focuses on the needs of women in the first 10 years of their career as they ascend the professional ladder into leadership positions. You know, being a woman is extremely difficult in this, particularly in the sciences. It's very difficult to get ahead and to understand how to get ahead. Just like we see with a lot of minority groups as well. And this group focuses on a series of forums and STEM events and things like that in order to just help the community. They're a great group. I got invited by my cousin Camille Stewart, and I will go and talk about the role of art in STEM. Should be interesting.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And then you actually this last weekend went to another cool art and science thing at the Kennedy Center.
I did. And you know what? Not a lot of people would think of it as art. I was just extremely happy, but I went to go see the National Symphony Orchestra play the music of John Williams. So this
who's John Williams?
Yeah, who's John Williams? John Williams is an extremely famous composer behind a series of basically half a century lasting songs, things like he's the man behind the Star Wars theme, the Superman theme song of the 70s. He's the famous E.T. theme song, Jaws. They played Jaws while I was there. It was a great rendition done by the National Symphony Orchestra and conducted by Stephen Reinecke. It was amazing. Basically the first half of it. And I guess this isn't coming soon to space. This is kind of, previously in space.
Coming past to space?
Because this was last week. But yeah, they played the shark theme from Jaws. They got me with some of the Harry Potter music from the Harry Potters 1 and 2, The Sorcerer's Stone and Prisoner of Azkaban. They played some of the Hymn to the Fallen by Saving Private Ryan, the flying theme from E.T., the extraterrestrial. And then the entire second half was Star Wars. It was amazing.
Yeah. It's Star Wars.
It was amazing. And there were a few, I didn't realize how much I loved the song from the second movie, Across the Stars. That movie is terrible. I'm sorry, when I say second movie, I'm sorry, I mean episode 2. Episode 2.
Not Empire Strikes Back. If any of you thought that Newton said that Empire Strikes Back is a horrible film and tuned out right there.
I don't want you repeating those. I don't want you saying those words on the air. For the record, I love Empire Strikes Back. I still think Return of the Jedi is better. Fight me.
You and I are on the same team here. You and I are on the same team.
But yeah, I didn't realize how much I like Across the Stars from episode 2. Go back and listen to it if you hadn't heard it. Obviously, they play things like the Imperial March and Princess Leia's theme from A New Hope. The Force Awakens, they had that as sort of their quote unquote finale, which was pretty amazing. The Jedi Steps in finale. I didn't realize how much I liked that soundtrack as well. I've been listening to it for the last day and a half since I went to the concert. But yeah, it was an incredible show. I'm glad to have gone to it. I'm not sure when they'll be playing it again. I know in September, John Williams will be having a concert out in Hollywood, California. So we might have to do a small trip out there.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of trips, I think I want people to respond in the comments on Facebook and Twitter, or reply to us on Twitter, I guess, about whether you want to hear us or see us do a Eclipse road trip.
That would be pretty dope.
Yeah, just a live stream our road trip.
I'd be, yeah. I have unlimited data. No.
All right, let's do it.
One last thing. Some of you guys may have heard us broadcasting about this on every form of social media, but by the time listeners are listening to the what are we on, 16th? 17th episode of the show?
Episode 17.
17th episode. That's not including the Rogue One, right?
Yeah. So this is the 18th total episode.
Okay. So this is
that
our
we've
18th
released. There's like another 4 that you will never hear.
This is the 18th released episode of this show. As you're listening to this, on the same day or potentially before, we will be releasing the first episode of the newest show on the Elemental FM network called Straight Up. The idea behind this show was, well, actually, this came from a few weeks ago when the James Comey testimony was happening. And when I went to Google so that I could see the written testimony, because he didn't state it in his oral testimony, I just remember coming across a number of search results that were just summaries, analysis from different websites, biased analysis, opinionated, liberal, conservative, a bunch of podcasts full of blowhards who think they know what they're talking about. But as
you're not including us in that, are you?
No way. Our listeners know better. But as I often do, I wanted to track down the actual source material and read it for myself. But there was all of that cruft sort of in the way. And even with that, I had to find time to read it during like the craziness that is my life. So I'll be honest, because of just those low barriers of entry, it took me forever to read the actual testimony. But one of the things that I thought of was, what if there was a service, sort of an audiobook service, but for actual source material behind the latest news of the week? And from that, along with discussions with Tom Kelly, the founder of Elemental FM and the producer of this podcast, the Ad Astra podcast, a new podcast called Straight Up was born. And the idea is that we're going to take the hottest news of the week and we'll be crowdsourcing that news so that you guys are submitting what we should be reading that week. But we'll take the hottest news of the week and we'll find the source material behind it and just read it aloud. Sort of, like I said, sort of an audiobook podcast for source material. No opinions, no analysis, nothing sexy. Just you looking for the facts and us giving you the facts. That's all we really want out of this. And, before you go thinking, well, how are you going to do that with, like, for instance, the healthcare bill, right? We're not going to read you the entire, healthcare bill with 8 million different cross references.
If you'll open sources. Your U.S. code to Section 21.
Right. I mean, we all know about the IRS code in 1986. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen? But we're not going to do that. We're going to go and track down meaningful sources, meaningful unbiased sources. And I know a lot of people say that, but when we say unbiased, we mean like, this is the government stating that they are doing this. So for instance, in our first episode, we read through the detailed section by section summary created of the new Senate House bill. The new Senate healthcare bill that was created by the Congressional Research Service, the group within Congress or the Library of Congress whose job it is to summarize that type of bill for you. So we go and read that kind of data, and we may in a future episode go and read the CBO's detailed synopsis of their findings on the healthcare bill. So we go and read that kind of source material. So if you're on the go, if you're just getting up and getting ready in the morning, you can kind of listen to it like an audiobook. It's a public service. We want to maintain it as sort of a public service. So we really hope that you go online, go to facebook.com/straightuppodcast, like it, comment on it, ask us propose source material for us to read. And also, if you're down, volunteer to read as well. We're always looking for volunteers. It's not going to be just me reading aloud.
We'll have an all-star cast of readers.
We will have an all-star cast of readers. So check it out. Once again, facebook.com/straightuppodcast. The first episode, the healthcare bill part 1, will be out today.
All right. That sounds absolutely awesome, as everything else on Elemental FM. So if there is nothing else, I think we're going to wrap this up. This is about an hour long. This was our short episode, guys.
Oh, right. Let's keep it to this.
Yeah. So as always, find us on Twitter at @Astra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to the mailing list, elemental.fm. Rate us on iTunes, leave a comment, recommend us, hoot and holler about how much you love the Ad Astra podcast. Because as always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.